Shogi, Japanese chess. My mentor is really good at shogi. He's not a professional shogi teacher, though. He's an upperclassman from my university, a bit of an occult maniac and definitely an oddball. I've always been interested in the occult as well, so I used to follow him around calling him mentor. One autumn, during my first year of university, I found out he could play shogi, so I challenged him to a game. I wasn't a complete beginner, but I still lost miserably. Even with a handicap, he easily outplayed me. A week later, after brushing up my skills by playing a lot of shogi on my computer, I went to my mentor's place to challenge him again. I put up a better fight this time, but he still defeated me, even with a handicap. During the post-game analysis, my mentor casually said, "I've played shogi with a ghost before." Intrigued, more than with his usual ghost stories, I leaned in closer. "Do you know what postal shogi is?" he asked, and I nodded. Usually, shogi games last a few hours at most, and if it's a speed game with 30-second moves, it can be over in minutes. But postal shogi is different. It's a slow-paced game where players don't sit face-to-face, but instead send their moves through letters. It's a game for those with a lot of patience, something that might be hard for young people to appreciate. My mentor's grandfather, however, played postal shogi with a cycle that only occurred on the summer and winter solstices. A move would arrive on the summer solstice, and the reply would be sent on the winter solstice. With only 2 moves per year, a single game, which typically requires around 100 moves, would take 50 years to complete. "You'd die before the game ends," I commented. My mentor nodded, saying that his grandfather had passed away 5 years ago. During the war, my mentor's grandfather was stationed at the front lines, where entertainment was scarce. He had a close friend in his unit, the only other person who could play shogi, and they would pass the time playing with a makeshift board and pieces made of paper. When his friend was injured and sent back to Japan, the two exchanged addresses, vowing to continue their games via letters after the war. His friend was from Hokkaido, a region far from where my mentor's grandfather lived. After the war, upon returning home, my mentor's grandfather kept his promise and sent a letter on the winter solstice, with just the move P2F written on it. On the summer solstice, he received a reply with the move P3D. When that simple, terse letter arrived, my mentor's grandfather wept. Thus began their long game of postal shogi, with each man spending 6 months pondering his next move, eagerly anticipating what move the other would send in return. My mentor's grandfather enjoyed this ritual immensely, even if it took decades. When his grandfather passed away 5 years ago, the game was nearing 100 moves, but the match was still undecided. Having learned shogi from his grandfather, my mentor felt it would be a shame for this lifelong game, which had become so important to these 2 old men, to be left unfinished. He wondered how his grandfather's friend would feel when the letters stopped coming. He even considered contacting the man to inform him of his grandfather's passing, but he knew it would only cause sorrow. So instead, he decided to continue the game, impersonating his grandfather. The address was already being written by family members, so all he had to do was imitate his grandfather's handwriting and send the next move, S2C. The game eventually surpassed 100 moves, and the outcome became clear. "Who's winning?" I asked. My mentor, with a complicated expression, quietly replied, "In 17 moves, it will be checkmate." Apparently, his side was winning. He had seen the checkmate pattern 2.5 years ago, but his opponent continued to play the best possible moves. My mentor had considered letting his opponent win, but he knew that his opponent must have realized the game was lost. Despite this, the opponent continued to play, perhaps as a testament to the seriousness with which they had both committed to this game. It was touching. "This is the game record," my mentor said, showing me the moves on a shogi board. P2F, P3D, P7F. The game had started with an old-fashioned strategy, and you could feel the passage of time in each move. As someone who plays shogi myself, I was struck by how the game illustrated the evolution of shogi theory over the decades. Moves that were once considered strong but are now obsolete were played without hesitation, only to be covered by newer strategies in subsequent moves. P7C, PX7C, BXC. The game reached its endgame and the tension rose. "Here's where I took over and played S2C," my mentor said, pausing before making the next move, BX2C. The following knight move revealed the long, narrow path to checkmate. It was a difficult position, and I couldn't make sense of it. When the opponent's next move was the best possible one, and yet it still led to inevitable defeat, I began to wonder about the person on the other side, my mentor said. What kind of person was this friend of my mentor's grandfather, who had shared a single shogi game with him for over half a century? The unexpected nature of my mentor's story drew me in. His usual ghost stories were unsettling and outlandish, but this time there was something different, something more profound. I knew their address and name, so it was easy to find out, my mentor continued. I had imagined an elderly man over 80 years old, living in a quaint old house, eagerly awaiting a letter from his wartime friend. But my mentor said something that shook me. He was already dead. I was a bit shocked, and then a deep sadness washed over me. Just as my mentor had hidden his grandfather's death out of consideration for his opponent, it seemed that the opponent's family had done the same, continuing the game in his place. It was as if two kind spirits had continued their shogi game beyond the grave. But my mentor shook his head. Not quite. My heart began to race. He died in February 1945. His wounds from the battlefield worsened, and he passed away on the ship back to Japan. I froze. This story was suddenly taking a much darker turn. So, who had my mentor's grandfather been playing shogi with all these years? The words, "I've played shogi with a ghost," echoed in my mind. My mentor, seeing my pale face, laughed and told me not to worry. I got in touch with his family afterward, he explained. He revealed everything to them, and they responded with a long letter. It turned out that my mentor's grandfather's friend had, in his final moments aboard the ship, written a letter to his family. In it, he had mentioned, "I'm dying, but someone might still send me letters, unaware of my death. If one of those letters contains a move in a shogi game, please don't tell them I've died. If possible, please reply in my name. He's a big fool, but a truly good guy who enjoys playing shogi with me." As my mentor recounted the story, he continued to move the pieces on the board. BX4I, LX4I, PX4I. When the bishop took the gold general and promoted, tears welled up in my eyes. My mentor had made me cry before, but never like this. I plan to finish the last 17 moves as a form of memorial for those old men, my mentor said, lifting his fingers from the piece. Rain. It was around the summer of my first year in college when I heard a strange story from an occult-loving senior named Kyosuke-san, who was a member of an online occult community. There was a rumor that at a certain girls' high school in the city, there was a spot on the grounds where it would rain in a very small area at night. Kyosuke-san was a local and an alumnus of that girls' high school. Kyosuke was her handle. Despite the masculine name, she was a tall, proper woman. When I expressed my disbelief, she glared at me and said, "Fine, come see for yourself," dragging me along to the location. The idea of sneaking into a girls' high school at night required some courage. But since we wouldn't be going inside the building, and because I trusted her assurance that the security was lax, I decided to go with her. The place she took me to was a secluded corner of the school grounds, once home to an incinerator, but now largely ignored by everyone. "Why does it rain here?" I whispered. "Years ago, a student jumped from the roof of the school and landed here. They say the rain falls to wash away the memories tied to this place," she replied. "It's just one of those old school legends." "Sounds fake," I said skeptically. Kyosuke-san frowned and stopped in her tracks. "Here we are. This is the place." It was a lonely spot between the school building and the surrounding concrete wall. It was too dark to see clearly, but as Kyosuke-san moved closer, she suddenly exclaimed, "Look, the ground is wet!" I reached out to touch it, and sure enough, there was a roughly 1-meter square patch of damp ground. Looking up, I saw the moon shining high in the sky with no clouds in sight. "Rain must have fallen here," she said, but I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling. "Is it really rain? Maybe someone just poured water here," I suggested. Why would anyone do that in a place like this? She asked, her head tilted in thought. There was nothing around, nothing to suggest that anyone would have a reason to be here. Maybe it's just a prank to keep the rumor going, I speculated. After all, rain falling in such a small area seemed impossible. When I was a first year, a senior told me about this spot, and they said they heard it from a senior when they were a first year, she explained, meaning the rumor had been around for a long time. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a thin, narrow stream of rain falling only in this spot, from the moonlit sky to the ground. It felt more fantastical than frightening, still lacking a sense of reality. If this has been going on for so long, then it must be a teacher and not a student, I mused. You really want to believe it's man-made, huh? Well, if you showed me the rain falling, I might believe it. But this just seems like, I don't know, maybe a teacher poured out some leftover water from a late-night meal, I said, looking up at the building. The dark, flat wall of the school loomed above us, and I realized there were no windows in this section. It was a corner of the building with no openings. Rain, rain, rain. I muttered to myself, desperate to solve the mystery. Water falling from the sky. The wet patch of ground was only about a meter from the wall. I looked up again, convinced that the water had to be coming from the building. Is that the rooftop above us? I asked. Yes, but who would be pouring water from up there? Squinting, I noticed that the rooftop was surrounded by a safety railing, except for one spot where the railing was missing, right above this place. That's the spot where the student jumped, isn't it? I asked, suddenly realizing something. Yes, that part of the railing has been missing for a long time, she confirmed. Has the rooftop ever been cleaned? I asked. Cleaned? I'm not sure. I remember the floor being pretty clean, though, she replied. I clenched my fists in excitement. Maybe they hire a cleaning service to do it, and the cleaner just dumps the dirty water over the edge to save time. And naturally, they'd do it from the spot where there's no railing. The next day, a curious high school girl sees the wet patch and starts the rumor that it rained here, I concluded, feeling confident in my theory. After all, there's always a rational explanation for ghost stories. You really are an occult fan with no sense of wonder, she teased. Say what you want, I retorted. But your conclusion is wrong, Kyosuke-san said softly. What do you mean? She looked serious as she continued. Your assumption is that someone saw the wet ground and started the rumor about the rain. But that's not how it started. What are you talking about? Kyosuke-san stared at me, her expression intense. Because I've actually seen it rain here. My mind went blank. I wish she had mentioned that sooner. Of course, as an occult-obsessed girl, I had to come check it out myself, she said. Back in her second year of high school, she had snuck in late at night, just like we were doing now. And right before her eyes, she had seen rain pouring down like a waterfall. If it were just tap water, I would have noticed, she added. My knees began to tremble. But wouldn't it have washed away by now? I stammered. So, why do you think it still rains? She asked. I had no answer. Kyosuke-san smiled faintly, tilting her head slightly. Maybe guys just don't get it. The feeling that something left behind can't be washed away so easily. She looked directly into my eyes as she continued. The girl in that story went through something she couldn't bear. She wanted to erase herself from this place. ESP. During my university days, after meeting a senior in my club who had an unusually strong spiritual sense, I started experiencing a lot of paranormal events. This led me to immerse myself deeply in the world of the occult throughout my student life. For a while, I became interested in ESP, extrasensory perception, and began experimenting with ESP cards, half-jokingly trying to develop my own psychic abilities. My mentor, that same senior, seemed to dislike the topic of ESP, perhaps because it was outside his usual interests. However, it wasn't that he didn't believe in it. There's an interesting episode that illustrates this. One day we were watching TV, and a special program titled Japan versus Russia Psychic Duel came on. In one segment, a Russian girl was supposed to demonstrate her psychic abilities by reading the contents of a sealed box while blindfolded. The paper inside had been written on by a celebrity guest, so there was no way she could have known the content in advance. Yet the girl correctly identified a drawing of a mouse. But then, my mentor commented, "This isn't clairvoyance." He had been watching the strict blindfolding process, so his statement surprised me. I asked him, "What do you mean?" He replied with a serious expression, "This is just telepathy. It's easy for a telepath." I was taken aback. He explained that someone with telepathic abilities could easily read the thoughts of the guest who had drawn the picture. No matter how securely the box was sealed or how blindfolded the girl was, as long as there was someone involved in the process, the contents could be known. My mentor went on to say that all the so-called clairvoyants on TV were frauds, and that they were merely ordinary people with a bit of telepathic ability. The phrase "ordinary people with telepathic ability" struck me as funny, and I couldn't help but laugh. My mentor frowned, but my laughter was also because I recognized the man standing beside the Russian girl as her interpreter. He was a notorious con artist in the industry, known for being exposed multiple times for fake psychic stunts. I even knew the trick behind this clairvoyance experiment. The interpreter was subtly communicating the information to the girl through coded touches, which was one of his usual methods, as I had read in a magazine. If a certain famous skeptic had been there, he would have insisted, "Blindfold the interpreter too." But I chose not to reveal this trick to my mentor, who seemed to believe in the girl's telepathy. It felt kind of endearing. A few days later, my mentor visited my apartment and said, "I'm here to get back at you." Apparently, after that TV program aired, the fraud was exposed in magazines and on TV, and it became a bit of a topic. So my mentor must have realized I had known all along and was just laughing at him. I had a bad feeling, but I couldn't very well refuse to let him in. My mentor pulled 2 small boxes made of thick paper out of his bag and placed them on the table. "This one is Box A, and this one is Box B," he said, pointing to the identical-looking boxes labeled with a marker. I felt a thrill of anticipation, wondering what was about to happen. "In Box A, there's 1,000 yen, and in Box B, there's 10,000 yen. I'm giving you a chance to take one of these boxes," he continued. However, he added, the money was placed by a precognitive person who predicted which box you would choose. If the prediction was that you would choose both boxes out of greed, then the 10,000 yen in Box B wouldn't be there. "So, how will you choose?" he asked, presenting my options. 1. Only Box A2, only Box B3, both Box A and B4. "Neither," he listed. I didn't fully understand the game, but I tried to organize my thoughts. If I only chose Box B, and it was as predicted, then 10,000 yen would be there, making option 2 the most profitable, right? But my mentor smirked and asked, "Are you sure that's the best choice?" "Wait, let's think this through calmly. Is the precognitive person real?" I asked, trying to get to the heart of the matter. But my mentor just said, "No questions allowed." As I stared at the boxes, the devil on my shoulder whispered, "Why not just take both? The money is already in the boxes, so why not grab everything?" But the angel on my other shoulder countered, "If the precognition is real, then Box B will be empty if you choose both. You'll only get the 1,000 yen from Box A. But what if the precognition is fake? If I choose both and Box B ends up being empty, I'll get nothing." The devil's voice grew stronger. Besides, the whole concept of precognition feels fuzzy. The money was placed in the past, and no matter what I do now, I can't change what's inside the boxes. Maybe option 3, taking both boxes, is the best choice? I started to say 3, but hesitated. This is a game, after all. It's something my mentor set up. He probably wants me to choose option 3, then laugh when Box B is empty, saying, "See? Greed gets you nothing but 1,000 yen. That seems to be the point of this whole setup." I began to feel annoyed. I considered choosing only Box B and then complaining if it didn't have the 10,000 yen. But if I picked both, I'd at least get 1,000 yen, which would help me get by until my next allowance. My thoughts were becoming increasingly practical. Sensing my dilemma, my mentor chimed in, "You're struggling, aren't you? Let me give you a hint. If you had clairvoyance or telepathy, what would you do?" Another strange condition was introduced. Layering one hypothetical on top of another made the situation even more confusing. Seeing my troubled expression, my mentor laughed. "It's simple. Clairvoyance is just seeing inside the box, right? You can do that easily by cutting a hole in the side." "What? That's cheating," I protested. "Clairvoyance works like that," he replied. "Well, if telepathy's allowed, I could just ask the person who put the money in, I suggested. Sure, but the person who put the money in isn't here, so we'll have to skip that option, he said. The person isn't here? Does this involve her? I asked, and he nodded. I don't know what's inside either, he added. I turned pale. My mentor's girlfriend was someone who, for lack of a better word, had an eerily sharp intuition. She could do things that felt almost like precognition, and I really didn't want to get involved with her. She's the real deal, I exclaimed, instinctively pulling back from the boxes. This was no longer just a game. If, hypothetically, by some slim chance, she truly had genuine precognitive abilities, this could be serious. I had been helped by her predictions during exams before, and they were so accurate it freaked me out, to the point where I had stopped talking to her. So, will you use your clairvoyance? My mentor asked, holding a cutter knife to box B. Wait a minute, I said. This wasn't a joke anymore. If her precognition was real, would choosing both boxes make the money in box B vanish or appear retroactively? Or had she already predicted everything, including my current thoughts, so that the outcome was already decided? A complex physics concept I had vaguely heard of, something about how you can't predict which grass a cow will eat, flashed through my mind, but I regretted not understanding it better. Was my agonized decision-making being observed from the past? And would the uncertain past of whether the money was placed in the box be determined at the moment of my decision? And what exactly does simultaneously mean? The more I thought about it, the more terrifying it became. It didn't feel like a realm humans should meddle in. The box in question, box B, just sat there innocently, yet I was about to peek inside before making my choice. It was all becoming too much. My knees began to shake and sweat formed on my forehead as I finally squeezed out an answer. I choose option 4, neither. My mentor grinned and put the cutter away. Did you realize there was one scenario missing? If you choose one box, the money will be there as predicted. If you choose both, only box A will have money. But what if the prediction was that you wouldn't choose either box? He continued, I didn't plan for that, so I honestly don't know what's inside these boxes. With that, my mentor casually put both boxes back into his bag. I realized then that I could never outsmart him.